Hello, everyone. It's Sunday, and welcome to CERAH's webinar series, Let's Clear the Air. For those of you not familiar with the Malay language, CERAH means bright. A bit about CERAH. We were formed in 2015 at the back of a really bad haze season affecting Malaysia, and as you would know, 2019 was the worst haze season on record. We are a bunch of civilians who gathered together, and we want to be the voice of reason to stop seasonal haze in this region. Our members influence policy and legislation at the government level. We create awareness and education. We provide informed opinion and expertise for strategic initiatives and business improvements. And we join forces with other anti-haze crusaders to maximize efficiency and boost traction for action. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Naja On, and I am an environmental engineer from Australia. I've been an active member of CERAH since 2018. The way that this webinar will run is that I will open up the questions to our guest speakers today. We have very exciting guest speakers for you today. And then I will take a few questions from our audience as we go along. So please put your questions in the comments section of this live stream at any time. Just a shout out to our friends at Kami, Klima Action Malaysia, who has kindly provided the tech and support for our webinar today and for our previous webinars. This is our third webinar. They are a grassroots climate movement that is fighting for climate justice through democratic and equitable action on climate. In today's webinar, we are focused on the Transboundary Haze Act, a legal instrument that was touted for many years as the key to punishing wrongdoers if found to have caused fires that then in turn caused transboundary haze. Of course, as you know, with the haze issue, there are so many dimensions to tackling the long-term solutions. So if your questions do not relate to today's topic, we promise we will do our best to gather these for future discussions. Right, so without further ado, with us today, we have Jia Yao and Azira Aziz, both of whom have spent a considerable amount of hours in the consultation phase of the drafting of the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act. It's interchangeable: Malaysian Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act, same thing. Both are practicing lawyers, with Jia Yao having a particular interest in environmental justice and Azira on human rights. We are very, very honored to have them. Welcome both.
Hi, Naja. Hi, everyone.
Hi. All right. Thank you for taking some time on your Sunday to join us. Really appreciate it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into the webinar, because I think this question requires a little bit more discussion that our audience are like just hanging to kind of get themselves into. So we'll start with you, Jia Yao. Many of us are frustrated, very, very frustrated at the news that the Transboundary Haze Act will not be tabled at Parliament as intended by the last Pakatan Harapan government. Before we get into how did we get here, can you enlighten us and our viewers as to the origins of this law? How did it start?
Right. So the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act that was proposed, it was proposed by the previous government as a response to the haze problem that has just been plaguing Malaysia as well as this region for decades now. So basically things have come to a head, and in 2019, last year, we've had another episode of the haze, and things are just not great. And so the previous government decided that they wanted to do what they could. And I think it is an innovative step in that they came up with the idea of drawing up the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act to allow the Malaysian government to take action against Malaysian companies operating overseas and contributing towards the haze. And so they wanted to have that piece of law to allow them to have that kind of power. So that was the broad idea, but it was still in its early days before the change of government.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll ask you some other leading questions in a bit, but I guess people are interested in understanding, why do we need to have this act in the first place? Is there a lead up towards this act? It's not new, I suppose. It's not new, is it? it's been talked about for a while.
Yes, this is in that sense. It's the haze has always been talked about, and people, obviously every person, every reasonable person will be thinking, why do we have to put up with this? Like, it's something that's predictable, something that's happening, it's business as usual, and why do all of us have to stop our lives or reduce parts of our lives? For example, cancel our marathons, our outdoor activities. And our children cannot go to school, have all these interruptions to our lives. And people who are particularly sensitive to it, people with respiratory illnesses, they face this in a much more augmented way. You know, the problems are not just an inconvenience. People die prematurely because of this. So there is no law in that sense that allows the Malaysian government to take action against the parties that are polluting, because here let's talk about we are talking about transboundary haze, and essentially haze that has come across to the Malaysian jurisdiction from fires, forest fires, plantation fires in Indonesia. Now those lands are operated or belong to companies, right? And these companies are a mixture of ASEAN companies. They could be Indonesian companies, they could be Malaysian-owned companies, they could be joint ventures. So, but there are businesses, right? And in this case, the facts point that largely these are palm oil plantations, and these are businesses. And in the course of it, fires happen regularly on these plantations, contributing to the haze that everyone, Indonesians, Singaporeans, Malaysians, that we have to put up with, even Thailand as well has to put up with. So in response, I think what the Malaysian government, the previous Malaysian government did was to in addition, because at the regional level, maybe I'll set the ground. At the regional level,
I think it's worthwhile talking about the Asian Transboundary Haze Pollution Agreement.
Yes.
Mm.
So at the regional level, there was this ASEAN Transboundary Haze agreement that was signed between all the ASEAN member states, the countries, and this was signed in 2002, and it has by now ratified by all the ASEAN countries. So this is an agreement between all the countries to say to have mechanisms and ways in which we work together, pool our resources to fight the haze, to fight these fires. And there were also provisions to say that each of us will cooperate as well as enact our domestic legal framework to make things work, to make the agreement work. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jia. I really appreciate that. So Azira, I guess we'll kind of continue on that sort of thought pattern. So there was the ASEAN Transboundary Haze agreement, pollution agreement in 2002, and then Malaysia now wants to introduce our own sort of law, federal law, to kind of supplement, you know, the objectives of that particular ASEAN agreement. After a really bad haze season in 2019, where old finger-pointing habits resurfaced between Indonesia and Malaysia, MESTEC back in the day, Ministry of Science, Environment, Technology and Climate Change, proposed the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act to Cabinet on the 19th of September 2019. So that's literally pretty much when we were having a bad haze this time last year. And since then was waiting approval to proceed with the draft act, which we now know has been shelved in this current government. Tell us how this process was initiated with consultation with industry, community, NGOs, experts alike. Was there an air of hope that local and bilateral solutions were being openly discussed?
Okay, so let me start back to, I'll bring this discussion back to the facts, because essentially it's the real empirical data impact on the people who live in this Southeast Asian region, the reason why we're having this discussion about the law, right? So the norm is every year for the past 25 years, if not more, between June and September, we will have the annual haze. The most recent one in 2019 showed hotspots in 777 locations in Sumatra and 363 in Kalimantan. This is last year's statistics. So basically, what we're seeing is also people starting to collect, and this is there's an economic cost, not just a health cost, which they don't release if you notice.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in 2013, it cost Malaysian companies, Malaysian economy up to 98 million US dollars. This is what I found on the internet. But suspiciously, it's been silent annually every year. You know, someone's keeping track of this, but it's not released. So Indonesia in 2015, because they're the ones that are suffering the most, right? Up to 1,000 API, 1,500 API haze pollution. They lose up to 140 billion ringgit due to haze. And Singapore lost an estimated 2.4 billion within around the same period. This is in 2015. And even like the oldest data also said a more conservative 901 million, but that one is in the tourism sector. And right now, there is a huge lack of data. But what everyone agrees is people are getting sick. We are losing a lot of money, especially tourism. And so what do we do about it? So this is a simplified version of
children can't go out, as Yaya was saying.
Yeah.
You know?
So and then there's like the only reason that any power holder would move is because people are angry and businesses are angry. So this is me being so just understanding why we're having this discussion, which led to the Talk About Act. Yes, the first thing is this is something that the current Minister of Environment was saying. Oh, we no longer want this act. We want to just continue with bilateral cooperations. The thing is, the ASEAN agreement on transboundary haze pollution has been around since 2002, and we still have the same problem. So it's not really effective. Number two, the reason a lot of the references and discussion were made in how about the Singapore's Transboundary Haze Act? Since it's been implemented, no one has been charged, right? So that's the criticism. And then the third question is, look, why are we going to, sorry if I'm a bit on tangent, you just bring me back.
Okay.
The third is like, the question is, look, we already have the Environmental Quality Act, right? Which is supposed to be the umbrella act of all of the environmental issues in the country, right? Water, land pollution, etc., right? But so why don't you just include the haze pollution issue into the climate change provisions within the act? Why do you need to introduce a new act? So this is where I have to address the cooperation. Then this is the discussions that went on. We were called in by Academy Science Malaysia. There were a lot of groups. You have the professionals, you have the civil servants, you have the NGO, you have like experts, you have the companies. Even the companies were called, and of course they were very vocally against it.
Right.
So there were people like us. There were even like youth groups who are standing there like this. You know, it's not just about human rights. There are people who actually brought, look, I'm from this area that was affected by open burning, by the plantations. This is within the, if you drive through a highway in certain times of the year, I will not name the place, I don't want to be sued. You will suddenly get a lot of smoke at night if you drive at night. And it's very thick smoke, but it clears up in the morning. So so this was what was reported to me. And then I actually brought that to the attention of the people, the civil servants, and they actually found that it was, the next thing I knew, there was a media report. Yes, they were actually open burning by a particular plantation there, which shall not be named. So there is this interest by the ministry when they decided, okay, we're going to entertain this idea. We're going to do a feasibility study on whether we need an act. And yes, we do have people from within the government framework that actually agrees, not just former Minister Yeo Bee Yin, but also the civil servants and the professionals who agreed that we need. Because what people fail to understand is it's not just about why do you bother with this legislation? Because Singapore has it, no one's getting charged. It's about setting regulatory compliance standards. Because if RSPO and all of the other standards that's supposed to be regulating all these plantations or even other smaller shareholders is effective, why do we still have the same problem every single year? What is it that we're doing wrong? And where is it that we can work together? Because essentially we don't want to attack everybody. We understand we need jobs, so we need the investment to come in. It doesn't matter in Indonesia or in Malaysia. We are both like plantation. We're one of the larger producers of palm oil in the world. We need the money.
Yeah. So it sounds like, Azira, it sounds like people did come together to talk about open fires. So I wanted to go back to open fires for a minute, because it sounds like we have a local and domestic sort of open fire problem that we still haven't solved. And then like between June and September, we have a transboundary haze problem that is caused by bigger fires on bigger plantations and bigger sites. So I think Jiao Yao, you were in those meetings as well. So how did it come together? Like, what kind of conversations happened?
I think we basically don't want fires, right? So ASEAN citizens,
right. So that's the
we
cause
don't
of
want
the
fires.
Haze fires. Let's get clear on this one.
So we want our well-being. We want to improve our lives. We want to live with dignity, and we want to be working in healthy workplaces, right? So fires, whether it's here, whether it's in Indonesia, the people don't want it. Now the problem is some people, in doing their businesses, they cut some corners, right? They hide behind their subcontractors. They hide behind subsidiaries. When I say hide, I mean they don't take responsibility for the practices of clearing land, of managing land, of those entities beneath them, right? Or down that chain. So this is an issue of holding people to account when they behave in a way that is irresponsible and harm others. Now, the problem is the law does not allow the accountability, because here, when we're talking about transboundary haze, we are bumping up against the limits of our laws. So generally, this is a limit that is faced by most countries, because our laws are, well, it functions within the legal system, and our legal systems end at our national borders. So if someone from Indonesia were to have a massive fire and the haze particles come over and assault us, then I, as a victim, I cannot go to my Malaysian courts to hold that party over there, whether it is a company owned by an Indonesian shareholder or owned by a Malaysian shareholder who lives in Subang Jaya next to me. I cannot go to my court to hold that person accountable. Now, that means we don't have a proper rule of law. That's the reality. So
and was this kind of conversation that turned up with the government, the previous government, to say, I cannot do anything about this injustice? And did that come about in terms of, did those conversations happen behind closed doors, obviously, but in a transparent sort of manner with all these people that Azira was mentioned before? So Azira, chip in into this if you like to, but I was asking the questions in terms of both of you. So did you mention the Environment Quality Act, which is our Environment Protection Act in Malaysia in 1974? So did it highlight some of the limitations of that act, and then what that act can do, and then brought forward the fact that, look, we need to punish wrongdoers outside of Malaysia, even though they're based in Malaysia, they have plantations in Malaysia that affect Malaysians via this Transboundary Haze Act?
The resistance isn't legal. The resistance is, these are civil servants who do the thankless groundwork, of which we benefit from, but they don't really get highlighted. There's a lot of unsung heroes.
Of course.
And to them, their fear is, as it is, it's really hard to get collaboration. Because right now there is, correct me if I'm wrong, Ajayo, there is a law that says, even plantation companies cannot willingly share data with other governments. Because there is an issue. You remember ASEAN, this is where ASEAN is a bit problematic. We have a non-intervention policy we have never broken. It's the only way ASEAN functions. We are not the European Union. So basically, there's a lot of limitations. Like, a lot of collaborative work is mostly like lobbying. Right? So you lobby each other, but there's no binding stick that tells you if you don't do this. So when you actually have this kind of local law, the fear is, then the country shuts down, because to them they want to protect their investment that flows into the country, right? And also the company's interest is, why should I invest in a country that allows me to be punished and doesn't protect my business interests? So that is the concern. This is not legal. This is the practical reality, and more like policy driven kind of question that goes around. And there is a legit fear, because and to be credit to Indonesia, they have done a lot of groundwork trying to reduce the haze. This year, if you notice, on top of COVID-19, and Indonesia is actually one of the highest ranking countries in terms of number of cases of COVID-19, which probably part of the reason why we have. Do you see the air outside? It's not that bad, right? And on top of that, also, but I think this is more like an anomaly. It's something that we have to see only next year, once, touch wood, we have a vaccine and things go back to complete normal and people operate on a more normal basis. You may see the same problem recurring. But the question is, how do you measure the quantitative impact, the empirical data? Because even for economic and health impact, governments are hesitant to release data publicly, right, for us to analyze and give feedback. Because essentially, you get what I mean? There's an issue of sovereignty, there's an issue of business interest, and at the same time, they're trying to balance the fact that there are people who are literally dying from the annual haze. So like, yeah, so I'm like looking through, like I've read, like I've updated my points. Like they actually convicted and bankrupt many companies responsible for burning, terminating many. So these are the small slash and burn, alleged small slash and burn practitioners. Banning new development on paid for jungles, establishing joint patrols with police, Malaysia, media, military, and US local government, to up to 800. So they identified 800 fire-prone villages, and they worked with the grassroots to ensure that they don't have this kind of problem from the ground. Like I said, we can't see the impact since 2019 because of COVID-19.
That's right.
But,
and I think they introduced things like, you know, firefighting facilities, you know, sort of resourcing on the ground if spot fires do happen. So like, let's go back to fires. Thank you, Azira. I really appreciate that. Very passionate people we have today on the panel. But I guess the topic of today's webinar is, do we need a transboundary haze law? And I personally don't think a transboundary haze law is a be and end all to fires and responsible sort of open burning practices, but it is one of many sort of long-term solutions to, you know, like seriously get some accountability happening. And Jiao, you were talking about accountability, like how, like I'm sitting here, I've got smoke outside of my house, I can't go out, and I have to spend money, by the way, to buy like an air filtration system, masks, you know, I can't get, you know, it's, as you said, it's an economic impact of zero, but also a health impact. It actually is impeding my right to clean air. I can't even get outside. So like, you know, I guess the number one thing that's most prominent is accountability. I think a lot of Malaysians are sick and tired of not having people having doing this over and over again. We've seen companies being fined, but again, they get to do it again. They're in operation, and then we find sort of repeat offenders. So will the Malaysian specifically Transboundary Haze Act kind of, you know, become a platform for us to, you know, have, again, things like transparency on data, sharing your plantation sort of geographical boundaries, what are the things you do, and maybe your sub plantations, like your smaller plantations that actually are your, you know, I think Jia mentioned, but will we have access to those things via this law?
Okay, so Najee, so your question, yeah, that's the question, right? So yes. Will a Malaysian law on transboundary haze help us? So now we are now talking about what should an aspirational law on the transboundary look like? All right, let's go on that basis with the appreciation that what we need is a broad set of toolkits, because there are many factors at play. There's geopolitics at play, and then there is, now we're talking about legal accountability and in improving the rule of law in the ASEAN region. Now, within that scope, will a Malaysian transboundary haze law help? I will say definitely yes, because that will help plug the, you know, because that will help plug the current limitations of our laws. Our basic laws are limited because of the so the first thing is the jurisdictional issue. And I think if we were to angle, all right, taking note of the geopolitics, the sensitivity of, yes, we are still deep in the ASEAN way of government to government engagement, and that is quite volatile, as we have seen when Singapore went ahead and did their own Transboundary Haze Pollution Act of Singapore in 2014, and then Indonesia retaliated as expected in the ASEAN way, which was behaving like a very angry boy. And so all diplomacy fell apart, and things became very difficult for Singapore. Now that's on the politics of it, all right? And that is very much on the national, it's the Singaporeans against the Indonesians. When we talk about the rule of law, we talk about accountability for the people who are victims. They could well be Indonesians living in Malaysia, trying to get on with their lives. all right? So we're talking about victims, anyone at all, irrespective of their nationality, because that doesn't matter. Trying to hold people who are contributing to the haze accountable, all right? They could be Malaysians, they could be Indonesians, they could be a mix of both, all right? That's the nature of transnational corporations, by the way. So it's about accountability. So how do we hold people to account? Now, within our current legal system, there are three general ways, right? So first is in criminal law, right? That means the government acting on behalf of all of us as the state would punish someone for a criminal offense that has been created. That's one, right? Two would be the government going after that person in civil action to claim compensation against that polluter to remedy the harm that that person has caused. So that would be a civil action brought by the government. Third would be the victims ourselves as citizens, as persons, as human beings who are harmed, as businesses whose business has been affected. For example, if I'm an outdoor company and I have to cancel my events, right? So for anyone, private citizens, private actors who are harmed, to be able to reach across to the polluters and anyone who can be directly linked to polluters to account, right, for the contribution towards the haze. So these are the three general dimensions in which accountability can be had. Now, against knowing these three, that's where I think we need to talk about the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act. So the act should empower the government to hold people in criminal offenses, right? The act should create criminal offenses for Malaysian companies operating elsewhere, contributing to transboundary haze. And it will allow the Malaysian government, our attorneys general chambers, to prosecute maybe the principal company, the HQ that is registered here, right, for how their subsidiaries behave. It could also be, so it could be things like, you have to give us data. You have to let us know what you're doing over there.
Yes.
Now, who will be targeted? Well, of course, we don't want to be hampering the businesses of these plantations, of these businesses. So that, but then it's in the details, so we can work out that. So that's on one.
Yeah.
That's the Malaysian Act should have that, creating that criminal offense. Two, the Malaysian Act should empower the Malaysian government to hold them accountable for compensation if we can show proof that they cause harm. Well, why? Because our hospitals are otherwise bearing the cost, right? Because there's a surge of respiratory cases and related cases, and then then businesses are. Azira has talked about this huge amount of economic losses, and you know, I believe in capitalism, and capitalism works this way. Costs have to be attributed to the right players.
Correct.
Right now, cost is absorbed by all of us. Yes. And by the natural environment, right? We're contributing hugely to the climate change, to the climate change problem as well. And then thirdly, another feature that this domestic Transboundary Haze Act should have is it should allow victims in Malaysia to reach out to parties who contribute to the haze. So right now we can't, because the laws stop us from doing it, because there are issues in terms of who has the standing to sue, because right now the only way to take action is our government. So as a person, say if a person's father has passed away prematurely because of the haze, where can the person go? He can't launch a suit directly against a subsidiary of a Malaysian company operating in one of those lands in which there are fires, and which perhaps has been already convicted of having plantation fires by the Indonesian government. That person cannot sue. So what can the person do? He can only go to the member of parliament of his area and beg the MP to move the government and take action on a government to government basis.
Level.
Now that is very inefficient. If we're just using market language, it's very inefficient and is very low resolution in terms of reflecting the actual cost that some family has actually paid. So that domestic law should cover these basic things. And if we have this, then we have an improvement at one ASEAN member state, i.e. Malaysia, towards contributing towards having some form of rule of law. And here we're only talking about holding Malaysian companies accountable.
Great.
But
Thank
I
you
think,
so much for that.
Sorry, I just wanted to highlight just
yes.
that reach across from the end. Now, the 2002 ASEAN Transboundary Haze Pollution Agreement that all the countries have got. Now, that agreement was really good back in the day, but I think it's a kind of halfway house, because it talked a little bit about having a legal framework, but it didn't have the kind of guts to actually talk about having a proper legal framework at the regional level. So I think within this space, Malaysia, and I'm talking about a broader toolkit now, in addition to the domestic law for us that we should have, is on a geopolitical level, I think Malaysia should take the leadership and start having conversations about a legal framework across ASEAN, in which all countries have laws where citizens of those countries can sue their own companies that contribute to haze. So if Singapore has that, if Indonesia has that, the citizens can hold businesses accountable. That takes the government taking action angle off, that allows victims to claim against pollution. It can avoid substantially the geopolitical things at play.
Okay. No, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. And Azira, I think it's important for people to realize the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act is different than the Singaporean version. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute, because I know everyone wants to talk about that, because the government has said, I'm shelving this Malaysian Transboundary Haze Pollution Act because it didn't work with Singapore, whatever. But the thing is, it's not a copy and paste, as I understand it. And just hold on for a second. But so what Jia Yao, you're trying to say is that, we need to have a domestic law. It's a domestic Malaysian law that can put companies, that can put accountability into companies if we need to reach out to them. It just crosses those borders, because we know that Malaysian companies, even though they're based in KL, their plantations are overseas. But Azira was mentioning before about, obviously this law needs to provide for things like you need to give us information because you're a Malaysian company, such as, like your data on your plantations, boundaries, activities, and all that kind of stuff, because you're a Malaysian company, so you have to report to us, right? So, and I think that's what's been missing. And that's maybe where the Singaporean Act kind of was not as effective. And does someone want to take this point on board? Does someone want to explain why the Singaporean version is different than what we are proposing? Does someone want to take this on? Who wants to take this on?
I have never seen a bill from the government side, so I cannot comment on it. I don't think they have ever released a bill unless Malaysian Bar has access to a copy. Via
Azira, no,
no, we're not there.
So I can't comment. So that's why if there is a bill, I could have prepared like a comparative analysis. But I can point out that actually they do have a similar punitive, similar to what Jia Yao just explained, because we actually, as part of the consultation process, we actually shared these points with the other stakeholders as well as power holders at the time and there is a general consensus. Yes, there is a need to facilitate data sharing. There is a need to facilitate there certain point of punishment, or what is it that's going to make these companies be more compliant. Because right now we have the RSPO, like palm oil has extensive regulatory and compliance principles they have to adhere to, right? Especially when you want to market your product. You have seen what happened to some companies who has been accused of having not so humane labor practices. Business mati. You are banned from operating in European Union or some of the larger markets. That is a real reputational risk. So for me, I would strongly go, please continue back the Malaysian version of a Transboundary Haze Act.
Okay.
Because we do need that. No, I'm serious. Even though I'm just highlighting the concerns by the people who are working on the ground, because it is a crucial part of policy making process. You have to listen to everyone because they do the work. They would know, right? And their frustrations are equally valid. It's just that from our side, from a governance standpoint, you need to have this act. you need to set standards. You cannot play fool with this kind of people's lives and economic cost. You have to show people like, no, and in the additional benefit is, this is something my professor used to say, don't say lah political benefit to the politicians. I'm like, it's a very populist move. Everybody wants clean air. So I would still say we need this law. It's just that the type that we wanted is, as Jaya explained just now, it's basically the same because it's actually CERAH's position. And then what else? Well, okay. We just have to also be aware that reality on the ground is there is something called corporate lobbying in all of the countries affected by haze. So it is, again, finding a balance in between those business interests and our interests, and making sure that it's a win-win situation for all. And I'm still like Jaya, I'm still like, the polluter pay principle must apply.
Absolutely.
You cause haze, you pay for the cleanup cost. It's just common sense, right? So another thing I would really hope to see, this is my sincerest hope, shout out to someone in the government that may or may not watch this, please release data, health impact, economic impact in quantifiable terms, like how many people got sick last year compared to the past 10, 15 years. We can't get that data. I've asked all of the researchers in various universities. Even if they do, they say cannot share.
Right.
So by right, this should be publicly accessed information, because it affects us so badly. We need to collectively find a solution. Like, you know, why wouldn't we know when?
That's right. And that's the whole point of this discussion, is that a domestic law, we have Malaysian companies, you should be able to cooperate with government in terms of the things that we ask you for, because you're operating under Malaysian banks and stuff like that. Anyway, by the way, back to corporate lobbying quickly, I just wanted to put this into our viewers. We talked about that in the first webinar, actually, to do with, in terms of, you know, like your money, and in terms of like what kind of preferences consumers can have in terms of spending their dollar, and the power of their dollar is to you know, lobby for different things in terms of, you know, more sustainable practices. So that's, again, it's a suite of things that we do. But I think you're right, like a Transboundary Haze Act is crucial. And just quickly, Jiao, just really quickly, I'm going to get some questions in a bit. What is the difference between the Singaporean one and the Malaysian one, really, really quickly?
So the Singaporean one allows Singaporean citizens to sue any company. So those onshore in Singapore, or companies outside of their own boundaries. So that was the ambitious scope of the Singaporean Transboundary Haze Pollution Act that drew the ire, I think, of the Indonesian government, because it purports to allow Singapore, whether their own government or their public, to sue Indonesian entities. And I think that rubbed off as very aggressive. And so from my understanding of the Dasar Penggubalan, which is the drafting basis for the Malaysian proposed act by MESTEC, it is only targeting Malaysian companies operating overseas. So, so in that sense, that's the core difference. And obviously, it's not going to be a copy and paste job. I would give our Malaysian civil servants and the team at Attorney General's Chambers a bit more credit. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, there's smart people in government. There's smart people in business.
I think it is simply plain wrong to say that it's going to be the same, because nothing indicates that it will be the same.
Okay, great. So we just needed to clarify that for our viewers, because I think people need to understand that just because Indonesian governments don't actually share their own plantation data in terms of transparency, does not mean Malaysian can't do that with, you know, our own companies that operate overseas, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So if Malaysian courts are with a local law given the power to look at these cases, i.e. Malaysian victims can go to Malaysian courts, bringing Malaysian companies to those forums to ventilate their claims, then who is to say what kind of evidence is admissible or not, except the judge? It is for a Malaysian judge to determine what would be credible evidence. So this evidence can be all sorts. It doesn't have to be Indonesian official data for example,
That's right.
or official maps. So Azira earlier did say, and it is true, that under Indonesian law, the Indonesian government has passed legislation that has made it illegal for not just government agencies, but even Indonesian plantations to actually share data on maps. And so
Wow.
that is a deliberate attempt against accountability, right? Because cut off data, and then angry people will be talking in the dark. So, well, that's if Indonesians are trying to sue. Those are the challenges put in place. But if Malaysia were to have accountability in the way that I just described in Malaysian courts, then it is for our Malaysian judges to say what is right and what is wrong. Great.
Thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to take a question now. So I, just to rehash, I think, Jia Yao, I think you said like, a legal instrument gives you two possibilities of actually getting compensation based on whether it's a criminal act or a civil, act in terms of bringing people to court and bringing them accountable. So the question that we have here is, like Sudi Mohandas, asked that environmental disasters or issues that impact people and the planet should be branded a crime. So he reckons, we gone are the days where we need to address them through normal process and issues that penalize the wrongdoer based on, punitive measures, as you guys probably have mentioned before. Like, can we move in that direction? Is this one part of the Malaysian Regional Transboundary Haze Act that could address this question?
I agree with what Dr. Sudeep has said. It should be a crime. This is no different from, just imagine if someone in Johor were, if people in Johor were started to develop really powerful arms and they can throw stones really far, and they do it to hunt for transmigratory birds who fly across the Selector Brow as part of that's my livelihood. But then the stones can fly into Singapore and hit people there, right? So this is the cause of, well, so just bear with me, like imagine if there are Malaysians who are polluted by the Sungai Kim Kim in Pasir Gudang and they develop these mutant skills, right? And they can throw stones really far and it flies into Singapore and hit people there. Now the reality is, without a stone throwing transboundary act, they can't sue the Malaysians who are hunting these birds over here. Right, so that's the reality of it, and Sudeep has said yes, and this is a criminal act, right? You having a livelihood are impinging other people's lives. That should be a crime, right? It's an assault, essentially. That is what it is. It's an assault on your person, and then it is a harm on your business operations. So we need to broaden how we tackle this irresponsible behavior. I think one, criminal punishment is one, putting directors into jail, having fines, that's important, imposing compensation, i.e. pegging the losses suffered by society to you, make you pay for it out of your bank account. That's going to hit, if you're a business, it's going to hit your bottom line. When it hits your bottom line, finally, your shareholders will start to pay attention, right? And then finally, directors cannot hide these effects of how they run the company from their shareholders, from their investors. It becomes an agenda during the AGM where they have to discuss this about these litigation liability and risks that they have to face. And that's going to shift the needle in terms of, oh, okay, let's change how we operate. Let's ensure that our supply chain is cleaner. Let's be more stringent and rigorous and make sure that there are just no fires and that we take in more action that we do above so-called industry standards as such, and have a more robust and really it changes behavior. Because when a lay person, when reasonable people who are victims can sue someone, that story is very powerful. It demotivates employees who are working in these companies. It demotivates them when they see that, wow, we are actually harming real people and they are bringing these things to court, right? And so what can we do? Because we don't wake up in the morning and gleefully say, how many acres of forest can we burn today? You don't do that, right? So if we start to shift the needle in terms of pushing liability to the places that need to bear the liability, then those stakeholders, shareholders, investors, employees, management, they start to think, they start to be confronted with the reality of their influence and their actions.
Right.
And in the long run, they become better companies. They become better players in the industry. They can then, because of their stringent measures, because of their engagement with community, because of they work together with the local community and they respect them and protect their dignity, then they become robust industry players, and they will stand in better stead. They will have a lot more to talk about in terms of fighting the international campaigns against palm oil, for example, the other alternative oils and edible oils campaigns against palm oil, for example. And so you become better players in the long run.
Yeah,
that's the
and
market
as
at play.
Azira said, it's reputational damage,
Yes.
affects
I think
your
Azira
bottom
talked
line.
about it. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's right.
So I think we're almost done with the questions now. I think we've got 10 minutes to go. Is there, and just one more question, is there any other current transboundary acts in place anywhere else in the world? I don't believe so. I don't believe so, other than...
Not in the format that we understand it in Malaysia and Singapore, but European Union have their own environmental quality that is agreed upon by all of the members of European Union. Yeah. So that is something interesting. I actually looked at it and it was very technical. I ended up asking, like, okay, the scientists in CERAH, please help.
Okay, we'll try.
Because it's very technical to the microns, and I was like, okay.
Wow. Do you mind sharing that later? We'll share that with our audience in terms of what the name of the act is, and then people can actually look it up.
Let me check it quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
The EU will have the web of regulations because it's a functioning block, the EU, compared to the ASEAN block.
A word function there, Oh, okay. All right, I'm gonna break. While you guys do, I'm gonna break and take a poll. Do we have our techies standing by? There is a poll that we wanted to ask our participants today. You need to have a QR code scanner on your phone. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do, scan this QR code on the screen right now. Do you think Malaysia needs a Transboundary Haze Act? Let us know through the poll. So haze is a deeply complex issue, as you guys can tell, but hopefully you guys are a bit more informed from the discussion from our panelists today. If you don't have a QR code, go to http etc.ch/4y big A big C, as in capital A, capital C. So do this, if you can do that. I'm not going to share the results now, we'll share it towards the end, but it'll help us understand what our audience think about the Transboundary Haze Act. So just to finish today, I do have a few more minutes for our panelists, but everyone got the poll ready? Okay, I think that's done. Thank you very much. Just quickly, it must be very, 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 very frustrating then. This is a question that I'm going to take for both of you. It must be very frustrating then that the current Malaysian government has said they're going to shelve the drafting of the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act because of the two reasons. They say they want to keep bilateral cooperation between ASEAN nations, as well as because the Singapore one didn't work. So do you both think those are valid reasons?
Azira, you go first.
I would like to...
You're passionate about data, that's definitely, so this is your time.
If collaboration comes with a lot of sharing in data, which I have not seen in my research or in any of my esteemed academicians' research and engineers and all the scientists, I'm not convinced, and I respectfully disagree with our minister.
Sure.
I would hope that he would reconsider his stance and proceed with the work that has been done by a lot of players and stakeholders and power holders, because we all want clean air. It's just this year we lucked out, COVID-19, but we don't know what's going to happen next year and the year after that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yes, like Azira said, I really hope that the minister will reconsider and listen to more stakeholders, because I don't know where he finds his confidence in good old diplomacy in solving the haze issue, right? So I don't know what kind of toolkit he's talking about, because right now he's just going back to the single tool, the hammer or something, right? If the only thing you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail and you're no longer innovative. So I don't understand why we cannot pursue a domestic a domestic haze law while working on our diplomacy, because these are two different tools. I'm greasing my plier doesn't mean my knife on the side becomes blunt. That doesn't make sense, right? So I can have a wider tool set, okay? So I think the other thing is it's about communications. So if you know what you're doing and you can articulate what the Malaysian Haze Act is about, well, start with, it's not the Singaporean Transboundary Haze Pollution Act. Two, what is it about? It's only Malaysians going against Malaysian companies, right? So you know, I think it's about clarity. From the answer that was given by the environmental minister, I don't think there is clarity in terms of strategy. What is the grand plan? What does success in diplomatic efforts look like? What would mark success, right? We say, hey, we've done it, and we will never have haze again. What would that success of diplomacy look like? Will that be robust against changes in politicians, right? Yeah. On this side and on that side. Will it be resilient against that? Now, it won't, because if it is only based on personalities and individual leadership, then it is going to be very fragile as governments change, right? Yeah. And we know that, all right? So Malaysians know that. So what we need is, we need to institutionalize systems that would hold irresponsible behavior to account, right? So not only is this important to uphold environmental justice, but weed out bad industry players and shape more responsible ones.
Right, thank you.
So, yes.
So just to clarify though, like I know that we've been talking about the domestic act and domestic law in terms of bringing Malaysian corporations into justice and accountability. We are one step closer. So we're not saying that this is going to solve all of the haze, because there are other players that burn land. But you know, it is one, as you said, again, just for our viewers to clarify this is that it's one of many of the tools that we have under our belt. So I think that pretty much answers the question. So no, I personally don't think that, you know, I'm erring on the side of, yes, we need a domestic law, because I think people are sick of this. 2002 was when the Transboundary Haze Agreement was drafted, and we said we're going to have a haze-free ASEAN by 2020. Not sure. Okay. Okay, so just to finish, this is, where do we go from here? So like, for example, you know, like we no matter where you stand on this issue, it's clear ASEAN diplomacy is not going to solve the haze crisis. So ASEAN member states must be proactive in the enforcement of law to protect citizens' rights and uphold environmental justice. So citizens' rights, environmental justice. Where do we go from here? Do you think we have an appetite? Do we have an election coming up? Do we have an appetite for this law to come back into you know, the public discussion again?
When the next haze comes, it will be in public.
Oh, no.
It will always like that. Yeah. Every time the air starts getting smoky, that's when the discussion starts. And then when it goes away, and then people quite quiet down. Right. And the cycle is it's like seasons.
Yeah. So you know, yes, indeed, so true. So the problem is not about the absence of haze particles in the air. It is about the absence of institutional framework, laws in place, right, that will keep us safe. So that it's, you know, we don't care whether it's dry season or wet season, or whether the wind blows this way or blows that way. All right, that's not the thing. It is about having systems of accountability. So the really important principles are, you know, and all the countries have committed to it under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So goal number 16 is that for peaceful and working institutions in all our countries, right? So that people would have access to justice, so that when wrongs are committed, we have an avenue to air that. Otherwise, you have very angry people with nowhere to go. And that's just not good, right? So Sustainable Development Goals, the other thing that Azira has earlier already alluded to, I just want to emphasize again, because diplomacy doesn't address that. One is the polluter pays principle. This is an international principle that we have all agreed on. So diplomacy doesn't talk about polluter pays. It doesn't talk about that, right? So what happens to the polluter pays principle? Then polluter doesn't pay, then we pay lah. Because they don't pay, we pay, right? So polluter pays principle has to be upheld. The other one is the precautionary principle. Now, both these principles were actually mentioned explicitly in as the basis for the draft Malaysian Domestic Transboundary Haze Act. So these were supposed to form that precautionary principle in the sense that activity that has the risk of contributing to the haze, the law would say, hey, then if it's likely that you're going to contribute and harm people, then that activity should be stopped or curtailed, or there should be conditions applied.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna wrap this up. So speaking of peace, tomorrow is International Peace Day, International Day of Peace, sorry, with the dove, you know, everyone remembers that. Quickly, do we have the results of the poll? Do people think we need a domestic Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act? We'll see. Oh, everyone says yes. Yes, we do need one. So there you go. That's a bit of science for you, Azira. Bring that and kick people up in the ass.
All reasonable people. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, people. So I appreciate that. So just to quickly, I understand the transboundary haze law is probably not going to solve haze forever and a day, but you know, it's something that Malaysians can do, and this is how Malaysians can do it. You know, I mean, we can't do everything. We can't solve every world's problems. So this is one way that I think you can put your voice into this. So thank you so much for our panelists. That was an enlightening conversation, fascinating conversation with a very, very esteemed panelists. You guys can look up Jia Yao and Azira on the internet. They are pretty much superstars in their own right. So they're
she is. I'm not.
And thank you so much for talking, bringing out your brain power, talking to all these stakeholders about solving this huge transboundary problem. Now, for those of you feeling a little bit hampered, don't be, because our voices matter, and this is why CERAH exists. So this is why CERAH exists. We also need new members. If anyone else wants to join us, let us know and we'll get back to you. We exist to keep fighting for concerted action. So we're always going to be here, whether the haze goes away or not this year or next year. But thank you again for joining us, Jia Yao and Azira. Now, CERAH has put out a statement on the shelving of the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act, which has been co-signed by about 40 NGOs, civil society organizations, and individuals to keep momentum on this issue. So if you feel like you want to be part of the voice, there is a petition by Greenpeace that seeks to push the Malaysian Transboundary Haze Act back on the agenda. You can sign that petition. So that petition is on our website. It's also on Climate Action Malaysia website. It's also on the Greenpeace website. But we will send the link on that on the stream below, and we will be posting a recorded version of this webinar on our Facebook page also. So both the petitions on the Facebook page and the statement to bring back the Haze Act back on the agenda. So we'll post a recorded version of this webinar. If we haven't been able to answer your questions, we will collate these and attach some information here again on the Facebook page. So don't forget to like our Facebook page, CERAH Anti-Haze Action, which is www.facebook.com/anti-haze-action, and follow us on Instagram at CERAH Asia for updates. We will continue to fight to keep our skies clear in 2020 and beyond. So we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, live stream has ended.
Okay.